All right, so I'm going to go through some of these questions. All the questions highlighted in yellow, I'm going to go through on here. And then the blue one I'm going to go through at the very end. All right, that's one's mastery. So if you can't really create that one, it's not really the end of the world for this, but I'm going to go through it with you, what you can do to try and create that. All right, so for number two, when we do this, it says you want to paint a piece of pottery at an art studio. Studio A charges $10 for a vase and costs an additional $8 per hour. So I'm going to write Studio A, and it's $10 for the vase, and then we know it's going to be an additional $8 per hour, which we can then represent by 8x. All right, and then for Studio B, it goes on to say that theirs is $16 for the vase, so it's $16 no matter what, and then it's $6 per hour, which we can represent as 6x. So the key thing here of how to set this equation, it says write an equation to represent when the two studios would be equal in price. So that means we need to figure out, well, how can we determine the price of Studio A and the price of Studio B? Well, we know no matter what, it's going to be $10 as soon as you go in, and then it's $8 per hour. So depending on how many hours you are, we'll add that to the $10 you had to pay to begin with. And for Studio B, it's $16 when you go in, plus $6 per every hour. So if we want to know when these are equal, we simply just need to go ahead and set our two expressions that we just made to represent the cost of each studio equal. So 10 plus 8x is equal to 16 plus 6x. And then we can go ahead and solve. Well, first, then it says for B, we need to define our variable. So what did x represent? So we would then have to go ahead and say, so I'm just going to move this over. We would say x represents the number of hours that you paint the pottery, the number of hours that you use the studio, but as long as you're talking about how many hours you are using the studio, all right? Some people in your Google Forms said that the number of hours it takes for the studios to be equal, and that doesn't necessarily represent what a variable is because you're only giving me that the variable can be one number and one number only, but the x represents per hour. And yes, when we solve it, it's going to give us that answer, but x can represent any number of hours that we want to stay in that studio. All right, then from here, we're going to go ahead and solve. So I'm going to move my variables to one side. So I'll solve 6x, or subtract 6x. So 10 plus 2x is equal to 16. So now that I got my variable on one side all by itself, I need to move my constants to the other so I can start isolating my variables. So I'll subtract 10. So I get 2x is equal to 6. And now since we're multiplying, the inverse of multiplication or the opposite of multiplication is division. So then we'll divide each side by 2 and x is equal to 3. So this means that it will be 3 hours. If you were to do each studio for 3 hours, they would be equal in price. All right, so now we're going to move on to question number 3. It says your school drama club charges $4 per person for admission to a play. So I'm going to highlight this because it's important information. The club borrowed $400 to pay for costumes and props. So that means right away they're $400 in negative because they borrowed that money. So after they pay back the loan, and when they say that, what we mean is after they paid back this $400 that they borrowed. So after they paid back that $400, they then made a profit. So they made $100. So when it's $4 per person for admission to play, we can start off by writing that this is 4x. For every person that's going into this play, they're paying $4. They borrowed money. They borrowed $400. So that means that they are subtracting this from the amount of money that they made from their ticket because they paid it back. So if they sold 500 tickets or $2,000, well, then they would have to subtract the $400 that they made from it to figure out how much money they made in all. And when it says that they made a profit of 100, that's how much money they made. So this is our equation that we would set up. To define our variable, x represents the number of tickets sold to the play. Right? Because it said $4 per person for admission to the play, so 4 times x represents how many people went to this play. So then for part C, if we want to solve, we need to start isolating our variable. So there's nothing that we can simplify from each side. So we get 4x is then equal to 500. And then to solve, we need to divide each side by 4 to isolate that variable. X is then equal to 125. So that means that they sold 125 tickets. All right, the next one I'm going to go through now is number 5. So number 5 says 2 times the grade of 2 consecutive integers. So first off, when I see this, 2 consecutive integers, that's telling me what I'm setting up. So remember, consecutive integers are numbers that are directly after each other, 10 and 11, 25 and 26. So there's no spaces in between them. Let's say 35 and 36. So to set up 2 consecutive integers, as we can see, our first number we can set up by just our variable, and our second one we can say, well, 1 plus that. So x and x plus 1 can represent our two consecutive integers. And when we read this, it says 2 times the greater of the consecutive integers and 3 times the lesser. So x plus 1 would obviously have to be our greater integer, consecutive integer, and x would have to be our lesser consecutive integer. So when we're creating our equation, we're going to use these to represent the lesser and greater. So 2 times the greater of the 2 consecutive integers. So our greater one is x plus 1, so 2 times x plus 1 we know is equal. And then it says 9 less than 3 times. So when we know it's 9 less, I know that means it's going to be minus 9. So 3 times the lesser integer, well, the lesser integer is x, so 3 times x minus 9. And then from here, to define our variable, we will say x, I'm going to write it here, x represents the lesser or the smaller or the lesser of the 2 consecutive integers. All right, so now let's go ahead and solve. The first thing I need to do is simplify. So I'll distribute the 2 in. So 2 times x gives me 2x, and 2 times 1 gives me 2. Then I'm going to go ahead and move all my variables to one side of the equation. So I like to move mine to the left. So I'm going to subtract 3x from both sides to move it to the left. So 2x minus 3x is negative x. Then I'm going to go ahead and isolate my variable. So I'm going to move the constant to the other side. So since it's adding 2, I need to subtract 2. And negative x is equal to negative 11. I'm not done yet. I need to isolate that variable even more. So I'm dividing each side by negative 1. And x is equal to 11. And it only asks you to solve for the first consecutive number. So this will be your answer. X is equal to 11. All right, so now for number 9, it asks us to solve for w. So in this one, we're given an equation that has variables, multiple variables, and we need to rewrite these. Instead of it saying solve for p is equal to, we want it to be rewritten where w is equal to. So we're trying to solve for w. All right, this is something that's really important in our next units and in units down the road as well. You must be able to manipulate your equation to solve for a different variable. All right, so if I want to isolate my variable w, I need to look and say, what's happening first? Well, first I have this 2L that's being added to it, so I need to subtract 2L. So I'm going to subtract 2L from both sides, and I get P minus 2L is equal to 2W. And now I'm just being multiplied with the 2, so to get rid of multiplication, I'm going to divide. And W is equal to P minus 2L divided by 2. Do not separate these for right now. Do not separate it and write P over 2 minus L. If you did, you still get credit, but you don't need to. You can just leave it like this. All right, so this is our final answer for number 9. All right, so for this problem, for number 10, we're now just asked to solve x for the rest of these. For number 10, remember, the first thing we need to do is we need to simplify everything we can on each side of the equation. So I'm just going to write this line down here, and I'm going to focus on simplifying each side. So when I look at the left, I have 12x minus 6x. Since they're on the same side, I don't use inverse operations. I can combine my like terms. And 12x minus 6x, we can remember, we're just subtracting or adding the coefficients. And 12 minus 6 is equal to 6. So it's 6x minus 4 is equal to. So I just simplified everything I could on that side. For this one, I see I have this parentheses, and it's minus. So that means I'm multiplying negative 1 into both of these terms. So now it's going to be equal to 8x. Well, negative 1 times 5x is minus 5x. And negative 1 times negative 18 is a positive 18. So now, once again, I'm going to go ahead and combine my like terms. So 8x minus 5x is 3x. They're on the same side. So I don't need to worry about using inverse operations because I'm not moving it from one side to the other. And 18 minus 4 is a positive 14. Now that I simplified everything, now I do need to use my inverse operations when I want to move things to the other side. So since it's a positive 3x and I want to move all my variables to one side, I need to subtract 3x from both sides. That cancels. So now I'm left with 3x minus 4 is equal to 14. I will then add 4 to both sides, and 3x is equal to 18. Then I'll divide each side by 3, and x is equal to 6. All right, so now we're going to move on to question number 11. So we have 5 over 9 is equal to 45 over 4x plus 5. Now remember, I told you in class that once I start seeing that we're a little bit more, that most of the students are proficient in solving this, I'll start showing you guys different methods on how to solve. But for now, I want you guys, when you see two fractions that are equal to each other, they're not being added, they're not being subtracted, they're equal, so they're proportional, we can solve through cross multiplying. So we will then multiply our numerator with the opposite denominator, so 4x plus 5, and then the other numerator with the other denominator, so 9 times 45. And then from here, we will distribute the 5 into both. That's why it's important we write it with parentheses, so it becomes 20x plus 25 is equal to 9 times 45. I don't need to draw that arrow. Let's see, 9 times 40 will be 360, plus 45 will then be 405. And then from here, we need to solve. So we only have one variable, so we don't need to worry about isolating our variables. So I'm going to move the 25 to both sides. So 20x is then equal to 380. And then from here, I'm going to divide each side by 20. And x is then equal to, it goes into it 19 times. All right, so that would then be our final answer. All right, so for question number 12, we don't actually have to do anything, because the absolute value of x minus 15, it says is equal to negative 12. Well, we know that we can't actually have an absolute value after we take it, because the absolute value of, let me just write the number that they have, the absolute value of 12 is equal to 12, and the absolute value of negative 12 is also equal to 12. So nothing we ever solve that we put inside the absolute value will ever give us a negative as an answer, so it is no solution. All right, so that one will be no solution. All right, now the next one we're going to do now is question number 13. So in this one, we have the absolute value of 2x plus 1 is equal to 13. And remember, we can have that the absolute value of 13 is equal to 13, and the absolute value of negative 13 is also equal to 13. So that means that this 2x plus 1 could be equal to a positive 13 or a negative 13. So remember, it creates two equations. 2x plus 1 is equal to 13, or 2x plus 1 is equal to negative 13. Now we just need to solve. We need to isolate our variables, so we'll subtract 1 from each side. 2x is equal to 12. Divide by 2. X is then equal to 6. And then on the other one, we'll subtract each side by 1. 2x is equal to negative 14. Then we divide to isolate our variable, and x is equal to negative 7. So x is equal to 6 or negative 7. All right, so now let's go ahead and solve for question number 14. Remember, when we have variables on the same side of the equation and constants, we need to simplify everything that we can. So I'm going to draw this line down. Since I'm not moving it from one side to the other and I'm just combining like terms, all I'm doing here is just actually adding as they are. So here, 8 minus 3 gives me 5. So 8x minus 3x is 5x. And 5 plus 2 gives me 7. So 5x plus 7 is what I have on the left-hand side. Here, 3x plus 2x, so it becomes 3 plus 2. And 3 plus 2 is 5, so we have 5x plus 5. You might be able to know what the answer is right now just by looking, but let's take this a step further. So I need to move my variable. So I'm going to move this variable to the left-hand side. Well, when I do this, both of them cancel out. 5x minus 5x is equal to 0 in both of those cases. So now I'm left with 7 is equal to 5. That is a false statement, not true, which then means that there is no solution. There's no value of x that if we were to plug in will actually make this true. So remember, if we get a false statement, it is no solution. All right, so now for the next question, we have 2 times x minus 5 is equal to 4x minus 10 minus 2x. So once I see that there's going to be some simplifying doing on each side, I'm just going to draw that line down there. I'm going to look to simplify. So I'll distribute this 2 in, so I get 2x minus 10 is equal to. Now, there's nothing else I can do there. There's no other combining like terms, so I'm done on that side. Here I have 4x minus 2x, which is going to give me 2x minus 10. Once again, I might be able to know what the answer is just by looking at this right away, but let's continue. I'm going to move my variables to one side, so I have to subtract the positive 2x to both sides. And once again, once I do that, they both cancel out. Now I'm left with negative 10 is equal to negative 10, and this is a true statement. Well, when you get a true statement, this means that no matter what we substitute in, it will always work. So our answer for this question would be infinitely many solutions. Right? No matter what we plug in for x, it will always work. All right, so I put one of these problems on here as well because we're still kind of struggling as a class with solving this. So I just want to make sure you guys are doing some more practice. So remember, you can draw this line down your equation and you can say, all right, let me simplify everything that I can. So this is multiplication, so I will draw my arrow in and I will multiply because both need to. So 3 times 2x is 6x, and 3 times negative 5 is minus 15. Now I'll distribute this 4 in, and this gives me 4 times 5x, which is 20x, and 4 times negative 1, which is minus 4. Then I'm going to look to simplify this even more because I have like terms. So then I have 6x plus 20x is going to give me 26x. And then I have negative 15 minus 4, which is minus 19. All right, so now I went ahead and simplified everything that I could on that left-hand side. I'm going to look to do the same for the right-hand side. It's 6x minus x minus 1. So the 6x is not being distributed in. Remember, we can think of this as a minus 1, and we're going to distribute this minus 1 in. So it becomes 6x minus x, and negative 1 times negative 11 is positive 11. And then we look to combine our like terms. 6x minus x is 5x plus 11. Now that I have variables on both sides, I want to go ahead and move my variables to the one side. So I'm going to subtract the 5x from both sides, and I get 21x minus 19 is equal to 11. Now I'm going to start isolating my variable. So the inverse of minus 19 is plus 19. And then we get 21x is equal to 30. And then from here, I'm going to divide each side by 21. And x is equal to 30 over 21. However, we do need to simplify, and both of these are divisible by 3. So then my final answer is x is equal to 10 over 7. And that will be your final answer. All right, I'm going to go over just that last question now, number 6. But once again, that is a mastery question, so it's fine. If you don't understand it, it's not the end of the world. All right, so when I go to do this problem, it says a safety regulation states that the minimum height of a handrail is 30 inches, the maximum height is 38 inches. Create an absolute value equation that represents the situation. Well, one of the ways that we can do this is we need to create an equation like this. We need to have it set equal to some number. And the way that we can do this is we can first take the difference between the maximum and minimum height. So 38 minus 30 is going to give me 8. And then we can take the average because we have 2 of them, so we can divide it by 2. And this tells me what the average distance is between these, and that's what we can set it equal to with our absolute value. And then to figure out what goes inside the absolute value, we can then add the 2 distances together, the 2 heights, and we can take the average of those, and that is something that we can add or subtract to our variable. But we have to figure out, is it going to be adding 34 or is it going to be subtracting 34? And if we were to try and do this one, when we are subtracting over, when we go to solve, we would eventually have x plus 34 is equal to 4. And when we subtract over, we would actually get a negative value because this minus is going to be greater than this positive 4. So we would say x is equal to negative 30. And that wouldn't make sense for us to say that x is equal to negative 30 because our handrail would then be a negative distance. So by thinking about it like that, we can then cross out that answer, and this would be the only answer that we have. All right, and we can figure that out by taking the average distance between the 2 maximum and minimum handrails, and that will tell us then what it's set equal to. And then we can also take the maximum height between the 2 handrails, and that tells us what we're adding or subtracting in. This one was more about you guys trying to logically think, and it was one that is a little bit harder. But that is it for this video and all the questions I'm going to go over for this.